Good afternoon, Fort Collins. Once again, you are listening to Science CSU on 90.5 KCSU FM. I'm Rachel Mason, and we are sitting in studio today with Torri Kling. She's an undergraduate student here at CSU working on her honors thesis. And today she's going to talk to us a little bit about her studies with human perceptions on sharks and dolphins. So welcome, Torri. It's good to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So why don't you start out with giving us a little bit of background info on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a senior, biology, zoology, history, triple major. I actually have one more year, so I'm not graduating in May. But last semester, I finished up my honors thesis, which I've been working on for probably like a year and a half. And like you said, it basically assesses people's subconscious perceptions of sharks, dolphins, and the environment.
Perfect. And what made you choose CSU specifically, and what made you want a triple major and all of those different things?
Yeah, so I picked CSU because I realized in order to go on to graduate school and stuff, you need to have a really solid background first. And CSU has an amazing biology and zoology program, which is what I first came here for. And so it also worked out that I was in-state and it was a little cheaper, and I mean, it's turned out I've loved CSU. So why am I a triple major? Well, I started off doing biology and zoology just because I'm really into genetics, and with bio I can delve into genetics courses. But zoology allows me to do the animal courses, so like vertebrate biology and invertebrate biology, which will be really helpful in the future because I want to go on to grad school and do PhD work. So,
and what is your dream job after you're done with all of your schooling?
My dream job, I actually want to be a college professor at a research institution, so someplace similar to CSU where I can teach courses because I love teaching people, helping them with stuff that they just don't understand, and I'm quirky, so I feel like people would actually like me teaching them. And then I want to also be able to conduct research, so I not only want to continue with my undergrad thesis, but hopefully in grad school, my goal is to go somewhere where I can actually like tag sharks and get in the water and see where they go and see what they do. So hopefully I can combine the two, and that would be my dream job.
So why sharks, dolphins, and the environment for your thesis project? What sparked your interest in that?
Yeah, so ever since I was a little girl, we're talking like 4 years old, I've kind of been obsessed with sharks. My dad on the coffee table where I grew up had this like full color like shark book that literally had like shark attack victims, and I was just this little 4-year-old like flipping through the pages, and they're like really like gruesome pictures, and I'm just like mesmerized by them, like this is so cool. And ever since then, I've just been obsessed with sharks and learning about them and their behavior and where they go, and like their reproduction and everything, because we just don't know a lot about them. And I think that's one of the reasons people are so afraid of sharks, is because we don't know a lot about them. And so I wanted to do something with that, try and figure out why people are afraid of sharks. Because if you can figure out why they're afraid, then you can educate them and be like, no, that's not really how it is. Like, this is what's actually going on. And so I picked dolphins because they're nice contrasts. Like, sharks are the quote-unquote, like, evil, mean things, and dolphins are the, quote, like, nice and happy things. So There's something to compare people's attitudes toward. I picked the environment just because obviously they live in an aquatic environment, and a lot of people don't know about, like, ocean ecology and why it's important and why we should care about the oceans and all of this stuff. So I really wanted to combine the three just to kind of get a baseline to understand why people feel the way they do about those three subjects.
Okay. And so walk us through how you're researching these things, how you're analyzing people's perceptions on all three of those concepts.
Yeah, so I actually devised 5 psych studies, so psychological studies, to look at it, but the biggest one study I came up with was something called an implicit association test, or an IAT. And essentially, it's one of those, if you like Google it, and it pulls it up, and you click like buttons on the keyboard, so you'll hit like F or you'll hit like J, and basically the computer, like the software, records your time, and based upon your like time and how it's paired with different pictures or different words, you can figure out if people subconsciously like positive words over negative, or like pictures of flowers over pancakes or something.
So the longer it takes for them to respond, you're saying that they subconsciously might think one thing or another?
Yeah, so basically the faster someone responds to a cue, the more positive their association is with it.
Okay.
And so the slower they respond, the more negative their association.
Okay. Because they're thinking about it more?
Yeah, it's one of those when I say like flower right away, you picture a flower. It could be like a daisy, whatever, but you picture a flower. And that's what it's really doing. It's assessing the way kind of your brain is wired to determine how you feel about it. So like negative things, you're going to think, like death and dark stuff and scary movies. And if I say like positive, you're like, oh yeah, like weddings and puppies and cupcakes.
Right.
So it's really just assessing how people feel without having them consciously think about it. So it's not asking, do you like sharks? Because people are going to be like, yeah, I think sharks are pretty cool. But in reality, they could just kind of be like, no, sharks are freaky and I don't like them. And that's what it's really getting at, is it's trying to tear apart if you just straight up ask someone as opposed to what they're thinking a little bit deeper.
So how are these surveys constructed? You mentioned that it's an implicit test and you're looking at the time it takes for them to respond to these questions. How are you structuring the questions?
So basically what happens is it's a bunch of word picture pairings. So someone will sit down, they'll take pre-survey questions that are just kind of like, how do you feel right now? Are you slightly agitated? Are you relaxed? Just so you can get a baseline as to how people are feeling. And then they go into the IAT portion, and what happens is you kind of condition them first. So you'll put like a shark category on the left and a dolphin category on the right. And then you'll put up different pictures in the middle. And so then they'll have to, in my study, they drag and click the picture to the correct category. So if it's a shark, they'll take it to the left. If it's a dolphin, they'll take it to the right. And it records the time it takes for people to move the picture into the correct box. And then what you do is you do word conditioning next. So it'll be like positive on the left and negative on the right. And so they'll get words like happy and content or afraid. And again, they have to drag it to the correct category. And then third comes the important part, which is what actually kind of is assessing whether or not people view sharks as positive or negative. And what you do is you have a category that's shark or positive on the left, and then dolphin or negative on the right. And so then they're given the same pictures and the same words, but it has two labels for the category. And so basically, if people associate sharks with positives more, they're going to drag the shark pictures and the positive words to the left box more. And if they compare dolphins and negative more, then they're going to drag the pictures of the dolphins and the negative words to the right more. And then what you do is you kind of flip it. So you flip the categories. So you recondition them, have dolphins on the left, sharks on the right, positive on the left, negative on the right. And then you do the third round. So it'll be dolphins and or positive, or sharks or negative. And then you can really assess what people are thinking, based upon their reaction times.
Okay. I know that you mentioned that you have some free response questions that go along with your picture survey. What are you asking people to free respond?
Yeah, so basically, they're questions like, have you ever been to the ocean? And if you have, what was that experience like? Have you ever been to an aquarium? What do you think of them? Do you watch Shark Week on Discovery Channel? What do you think? Stuff like that. How do you feel toward the environment? Like, do you know anything about ocean ecology? If you do, what do you know? Are oceans important? Stuff like that, to just kind of see what people are consciously thinking. So you can actually hear in their own words, like, yeah, I've been to the ocean and it's awesome and, it's such a fun time. And no, I don't really like aquariums. They're mean and aren't nice to the animals, or, And then you can look at how they score and what they pair together in conjunction with their free response to get a real picture of what people are actually thinking, which is really cool for me because obviously I'm someone who really likes sharks. So it's always interesting for me to see what other people think about them and why they think the way that they do.
And have you analyzed any of this data yet? Have you found that generally people think one way or the other?
Yeah, so for the timed portion, for the IAT portion, I looked at how people, like the region where they came from before attending CSU, their major, their religious affiliation, and their gender, how those 4 factors actually affected their response times. And what I found was that how a person responds really depends on where they lived before attending CSU and what major they are. So your more science majors were more likely to pair sharks and positive as opposed and dolphins with negative, which was kind of interesting for me. But from the same point, I can understand, like, I'm a science major and I really like sharks, so I understand why they're important.
Right.
And the same thing held true for people who lived in, like, coastal regions. So people who lived on the Pacific coast or the Atlantic coast or the Gulf Coast actually had faster response times for shark and positive and dolphin negative. So it really depends on where people came from, because on the opposite side, people who are more like inland, so a lot of people from Colorado or like the Midwest, did the opposite pairings faster. So they had shark and negative and dolphin and positive. So that can really help tailor how we, the scientific community, educate people about conservation of sharks in the oceans, because you can really target and be like, hey, like, I understand you live in the middle of the country, but this is why they're more, like, this is why they're important. And you can cater, like I said, you can cater how you educate them. So hopefully you can change people's perceptions by using the fact that you know that they're afraid of sharks because they live inland and aren't by the coast every day. It's not something that they're aware of. Yeah.
Right. They haven't been given that information.
Yeah.
Those tools.
Yeah. They're less aware. You know, it's one of those, like, if you hear about a shark attack on the news and you live in Colorado, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a shark attack. Oceans are, like, super scary. If you live on the coast, it's something that you have to be aware of. You
Right.
go into the water saying, oh yeah, you know, like, there's a possibility of there being attacks. Like, let me be, like, safe. Like, you know, you're more conscious about it, which is probably why those people who live on the coast scored higher with sharks and positive, just because they have more of an awareness about them.
And would you say that the media and things like movies and documentaries, stuff like that, stuff that you see on TV or in the news, play a large role also in what these people think?
Yeah, definitely. You know, after Jaws came out, people were terrified. Literally, there's an entire generation of people who refused to go to the beach because they thought there's going to be killer man-eating sharks out there. And it's actually interesting, if you go back even to like the 1700s and you look how people like Carl Linnaeus started classifying sharks, you know, they used terms like sharp tooth and razor skin.
Very negative connotations.
Very negative descriptions of these creatures, which totally adds on to how people perceive them. When in reality, you know, like, yeah, they have sharp teeth, but fish have sharp teeth, you know,
Right.
like red snapper, you know, or goldfish, like, and people aren't afraid of them,
Right.
even though they have a lot of the similar features as sharks. So yeah, the media definitely is a big influence on how people perceive. And I'm interested, now that that movie Blackfish came out about SeaWorld, to see how people perceive dolphins, because killer whales are actually a dolphin. They're not actually a whale, which a lot of people don't know that, because they think whale, killer whale, it's obviously
Right.
a whale. But it's actually, I think it's the biggest dolphin species. So it'll be really interesting for me now to kind of modify my study and compare, like, how do you react to Jaws? And how do you react to Blackfish? Because I think Blackfish does a lot of the same things that Jaws did for sharks, but for killer whales. And it's really interesting. I've definitely watched it. I'm going to watch it a couple more times just so I can, you know, fully, like, understand what's going on in that movie. But it's definitely,
Right.
media portrayal is definitely an interesting thing.
Yeah, and especially now with SeaWorld, they kind of magnify, I think, all of the quote unquote attacks on the handlers there who are handling the whales. So tell us the truth about sharks and dolphins. Are sharks really the negative and the dolphins the positive, or?
Yeah, so obviously I'm going to be a little bit biased toward that question. I mean, honestly, what people don't realize are dolphins are quite vicious creatures. They're the only other species that we know of for now that will actually use rape as a mechanism for attack. So dolphins will actually rape another dolphin if they are angry. So you compare that to like humans, like that's something that's shocking that you wouldn't think that you'd see in the natural world, but it very much happens. And you know, sharks kind of get a bad rap because they're these big things that have teeth that are really sharp, but honestly, when a shark bites a human, it's not because it's like, oh, that's a human, I'm gonna go attack it, like it looks tasty. 9 times out of 10, it's misidentification. Surfers sitting on their boards look just like seals, and most sharks eat seals as a food source. So if we're going to look like their source of food, it's kind of logical that people are going to get attacked. And, you know, unfortunately, when a shark bites, one of their mechanisms for, like, getting meat off of their prey is to shake their head from side to side. Well, we're soft and squishy people. Like, people are soft and squishy, and if a big shark comes and bites on us and moves its head back and forth a few times, it's going to do some serious damage. And like most people die from bleeding out than from the actual attack. It's not because the shark like bites them in half. I mean, I'm sure there have been some people who've been bitten in half, but it's because they, you know, like they sever an artery and people bleed out instantly and they can't get medical care.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's one of those things. And killer whales again are the great whites. Only natural predator, except for like humans, of course. We kill them way too much. But in the wild, like great whites and killer whales actually have had documented battles, quote unquote, where like killer whales will come up and they'll actually, if there's a great white in their territory, they'll actually ram into them until they like kill the shark. So, you know, like it's all these like misconceptions that like dolphins are like flipper and they're cute and awesome, and in reality they're wild animals just like sharks, and they can be just as vicious as a shark can be.
Well, so how important are each of these animals to the ecosystem, kind of tying in the environment that you're studying as well? Is there one animal that's more important to the ecosystem than another that we should be paying more attention to, or?
That's kind of a loaded question. No, sharks and dolphins are what's known as keystone predators. They're these highly important organisms, and a lot of times they sit at the top of the like food chain. And if you remove enough sharks from the population, then what they eat, so like rays and seals, those populations are just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And then what the seals eat, so like smaller fish or like seagrasses, those populations are just going to get demolished because they can't recover fast enough from the seals and the rays eating them. And so you just have this cascading effect throughout the entire ecosystem, throughout every level of it. And what ends up happening is when you get rid of these keystone predators, like you throw the whole environment out of whack, which is terrible because I mean, people think, oh yeah, let's kill sharks, it's fine. Well, that affects the fishing industry, which so many people rely on for food. I mean, sharks keep seals and other big fish at bay. And if sharks weren't around, then you wouldn't have the smaller fish for the fishing industry. So then people wouldn't be able to eat. And it's this huge cycle that if we don't start paying attention to, it's going to get bad really quickly, especially because sharks have very long periods of maturing and of reaching a state where they can actually sexually reproduce. I mean, the great white, I think, has like it takes 10 years for it to reach sexual maturity. I mean, That's a long time. You kill a shark, you kill an adult great white shark, it takes 10 years for that shark's future, like the pups it could have had, to be replaced.
Right.
And that's a long time. Like that, I mean, that's a long time. And so what people, you know, like it's this whole, people don't realize that every year millions of sharks are killed for shark fin soup. Whereas only, I think in 2012, there were only 56 shark attacks on people around the world. And of that, I think, if I recall, 10 were fatal. So 10 sharks to 10 million.
Right.
Or 10 shark attacks to 10 million dead sharks. That's not even, I mean, like, if you flip that around, like, did that with the human population, I mean, how would people feel if 10 million people were killed each year? You know?
Right.
Like, it's crazy to think about.
Definitely. Well, would you say that people are trying to eradicate these predators also, in addition to just the market for fin soup, or is it mainly just the food market in certain places that are killing these mass quantities of animals?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, certainly there's this thing called bycatch when like fishing boats go out and have really big nets. Bycatch is the extra stuff that they catch in their net, and sharks are certainly a part of that. You know, shark fin soup is illegal in the United States. It's illegal to sell it, but it's really popular in like Asian countries or even like Australia and stuff. And what's unfortunate about that is, you know, like sharks can't regrow their fins. So you have to kill the entire animal just to cut off a couple of its fins. And it's quite an inhumane practice, really, because a lot of times what happens is they catch a bunch of sharks using nets, chop off all their fins, and while the shark's still alive, they just throw it back in the water. So essentially it sinks down at the bottom and drowns because it can't get oxygen because it can't move itself forward because it doesn't have fins. And so, you know, it's one of those where even if there are laws in place, like in Japan, there's laws that protect, like, I think it's thresher sharks over in Japan. And people will still go out, fish thresher sharks, and sell them on a fish market marked as, like, mako shark. So they'll sell it as another type of shark that they can legally sell, even though it's not a legal item for sale. And so it's a lot of, you know, it's really hard to try and have regulations to manage because so many people depend on it for a food source, even though I think it's technically considered like more of a delicacy. And, you know, like maybe if there were programs in place for all these sharks to utilize the rest of the shark, use the rest of the meat, because you can eat the meat. You can eat shark meat. I mean, I had an internship 2 summers ago where I actually went out and helped tag juvenile thresher sharks off the coast of San Diego. And unfortunately, we had 2 sharks die. We caught and tagged 85 in 2 days, but 2 of them passed away just because they were so fatigued and the hook was in so far in their mouths that they just didn't make it. And instead of throwing the animal away, we dissected the animal, took all of the scientific samples we needed from it, but then they took all of the meat and they actually like cooked it and you know, like they ate the meat. So the shark didn't go to waste. It had
utilize it.
Yeah, it had 2 purposes. So, you know, like maybe if we were able to like look into more options like that, just so the whole shark wouldn't be going to waste just for its fins, you know, and if you had more regulations, although it's kind of an illegal market anyway, so how do you regulate an illegal market? But I think half the people are consciously killing sharks, whether it be for food or for fear, and I think half people are accidentally killing sharks because they are trying to catch other things.
Okay.
So I think it's a lot, but if we don't start getting those numbers down lower, we're not going to have sharks left, and things are going to get really bad for us very quickly because people don't realize how many other things come from the ocean. I mean, it's not just fish and food supply. Like your weather and climate is regulated by ocean currents and nutrients and all of that too, you know. And so if you mess up and there's not a lot of like oxygen in an area because it's anaerobic and there's big algal blooms, well then fish can't grow there or like live there, so they go other places, and you know, it causes all of these problems, and it's stuff people don't tend to realize.
Yeah, definitely. So on the flip side of that, are there any issues with dolphins, being that they're so highly thought of in the human mind, how they kind of contrast with the issues regarding sharks?
You know, dolphins fall under bycatch also. A lot of the like fish markets, like tuna, like the tuna industry actually in Southern California was pushed south to Mexico because there were so many regulations against killing dolphins in nets and like sea turtles and stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess dolphins fall kind of into the same boat as sharks. Like, people don't realize, certainly probably not on the same level of death as sharks, but I mean, dolphins definitely get killed from commercial industries as well, which is why they put regulations on when you can fish and how many pounds of fish you can catch and all of this stuff. And that's why they're also like implementing dolphin and turtle safe nets where like they have like escape hatches, essentially. So if something is caught, it can like funnel through and get out. You know, like
Right.
the problem with dolphins is, like us, they breathe air. And so
Right.
after a certain amount of time, if they're caught in a net, like they're going to drown because they can't get up to the surface to breathe air. At least, I mean, a lot of sharks have to keep moving in order to live. But if like a net's being dragged, at least they kind of have a chance because they're getting water over their gills.
So you say, I know that you've been talking about all these regulations that are kind of in place in all these different areas of the world regarding this issue. So would you say that, because it seems to me that the issue isn't in the regulations, it's more in the enforcement of those regulations. Would you agree with that, or do you think that we need more regulations?
You know, I think it's kind of a catch-22. I think if you have more regulations, then people are going to do more illegal activities to procure what they want. I think it's really hard to regulate and enforce all of these rules. Like, the only reason I know about that Japan example with the thresher shark on the market and they labeled it as mako is because NOAA, which is where I interned 2 summers ago, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they actually did this study where they went to fish markets and bought a bunch of different fish and they did DNA analysis on it and found out that that's what was happening. So it's really hard to figure out, well, how do we go out and stop people from catching thresher even though they know they're not supposed to? So there's a fine balance between should we add like more regulations or do we have different ways of enforcing, or what do we do? And I think that's what policymakers and are struggling with in the like fisheries industry. It's just trying to figure out like what should we do.
Right. Kind of changing gears a little bit here. We talked a lot about how people perceive sharks, how people perceive dolphins, and kind of their roles in the ecosystem, and also just all the issues that are associated with them. How does that compare to, especially with your study, how people are perceiving the oceanic environment and issues regarding that?
So going through the responses, people are like, yeah, the oceans are important. I know that, but I'm not really sure why. People are like, oh yeah, like we get fish from the oceans, but haven't been a lot of responses where people are actually like, the oceans regulate our climate and our weather patterns, and there's fish and there's all these other resources and there's all this stuff in the ocean that's really important. And so it's interesting that like people know it's important, but they don't know why it's important. And I think that's something when people are like, oh, there's a shark attack, and then everyone's like, let's go kill sharks. Like, I think that's something that also needs to be brought up. Like, whoa, slow down a little bit. Like, one, you're not probably going to find the shark that bit the person. It's probably long gone. So you're just going to be killing another individual. Like, two, what's going to happen if you kill all of the sharks in that area? What are you going to do to other populations and to other parts of the hierarchy in that environment? And I think a lot of times, like, people just get so caught up in the, like, Jaws effect, that's what I'm going to call it, that they don't step back to realize, like, hey, maybe like killing everything isn't the best option. Like, let's try and figure out what else we could do.
Yeah, and I've heard just through my own reading and things that also a lot of shark attacks tend to happen in areas and during times of migration or like breeding patterns of the sharks. That's like when people are like in the summertime when people are most likely to be out in the oceans as well. So it's kind of like just haphazardly in the same place at the same time kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of the times your sharks will follow like fish migration, like schooling fish, like their migratory patterns, or whales. And, that goes back to, we don't know a lot about sharks. We don't know where most of them go to breed. We don't know where most of them give birth. We don't know what their migratory patterns are. And it's not that we're not trying. I mean, certainly there's tons of programs out there that are tagging sharks actively to try and figure this out. But like you said, it's one of those, people happen to be in the same place sharks are. And as the human population grows, there's going to be more and more people in the water.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be more and more accidental interactions between people and sharks. And so, you know, it's one of those things you have to realize, like, don't go swimming in the early morning, which a lot of, like, exercise people like to do, or don't go swimming, like, at dusk, because that's when sharks are most active. Go swimming during the middle of the day when they're most quiet. You know, if we can educate people on, like, the times to, you know, to go swimming and to not go swimming, or what to do if you are attacked by a shark, you know, like, things like that. It's probably gonna not necessarily, like, reduce the number per se. Hopefully it would reduce the number, but you'd educate people more. And I really think that's part of it. It's just people aren't educated on it. People just don't know, which is a problem. So
Right. How do you think that we can implement all of this education?
yeah, that's something I've been trying to think about. I don't know if I mentioned it back at the beginning when we started talking, but I'm really big into conservation and shark conservation, which I'm sure is probably apparent throughout this interview. But, you know, it's how do you sit down and how do you educate people? Because you can't, like, sit at the beach and, like, give a lecture to to a group of 50 people and be like, okay, now you can go swimming, you know, like, people aren't going to do that. But I think a lot of beaches have, like, warning signs posted, you know, stuff like that. And I think it's just one of those, like, through word of mouth by other people, or, you know, like, having regulations available and posted on beaches, you know, stuff like that. Because you are going to get people to read those. And then those people who've read the signs are going to tell their friends, like, oh, hey, like, don't go swimming during, like, dusk or dawn because sharks are most active then, you know. And certainly for, like, what I want to do, like, the future research I want to do, giving talks to, like, different universities and students and schools, and you know, like, I would love to do a TED talk one day about, like, why sharks are important and shark conservation, because it is an important thing and it's something, like, people need to be educated on. Or, you know, like, even if the media actually got involved and just, like, you know, here's a little 2-minute section as to, like, how to be safe at the beaches, you know, like, now that beach season's coming into swing, like, here's just some safety tips that everyone should know before heading out there, you know.
Is there not a lot of that now? And I mean, especially in coastal areas where that's a problem.
You know, the past 2 summers I've had 2 internships, one in San Diego, and then last summer I was down in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I mean, honestly, when I was, like, watching the news, I never heard that, but I think it's one of those, it just depends. I'm sure there are tons of, like, media outlets that are like, oh, hey, you know, like, bring lots of sunscreen and grab lots of water and just, like, watch out for jellyfish and sharks, you know, stuff like that. But that's nothing I've ever looked into.
Yeah, well, and it seems like it's kind of just a big cycle. If the media were to, you know, portray these animals in a different light, then people would kind of follow and think about them differently, just because the media plays such a big role. Especially in contrast, the dolphins that you were mentioning, they're not as nice as they might seem to be.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely, like, this really big cycle, you know, like, someone hears about a shark attack and then everyone's like, let's go kill sharks, and then people kill sharks, and then someone else gets attacked and they're like, let's go kill more sharks, you know. And the reason that's perpetuated is because of things like Jaws and like, open water and Deep Blue Sea, like, a bunch of those, like, shark movies where, like, killer sharks come out and, like, eat everyone. They're just being wild animals.
Right.
They're just doing what they need to survive. And I'm not saying they're, like, purposely killing people. A lot of these open water sharks don't come across food all that often. So when they come across it, you know, like, if you're at a shipwreck, like, they're gonna try you out.
Yeah.
And if they, like, take a bite of you and they're like, oh, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't taste right, then they're gonna stop eating you. But it's gonna happen. And, you know, like, there's this researcher in Australia, I think he's not quite done with his PhD or he just finished, but his name's Chris Neff, and he has been researching how the media portrayal of sharks and, like, the words that they use around, like, shark attack, how that affects people's opinions. And, you know, he found that instead of saying it like a shark attack, like, this person was attacked by a shark, saying there's an incident with a shark, because incident has a very different connotation than attack.
Yeah.
So using different words to portray sharks, getting away from their sharp, pointy teeth, rough body like image will also probably help people realize that they're not these like mindless eating machines that go out and kill people for fun. So.
Right. What about dolphins? I know that you were saying how just within their own species they can be mean, things like raping other dolphins when they're angry. Have there ever been any incidents with humans, with dolphins?
I think there actually have been a couple, like only a handful, where dolphins will actually like try to rape a human. But that's stuff that people don't hear about, you know?
Right.
You always hear about shark attacks, but you never hear like this person was molested by a dolphin, because it seems so unrealistic, because dolphins are they're like flipper. They're these like super cute things, and that's not necessarily the case. Like bottlenose dolphins are one of the more aggressive dolphin species, and that's what flipper is. So it's one of those where I think people need to be like educated on both. Like, yeah, sharks can be mean, but they're also really like, they're not that bad. Whereas dolphins, they can be kind of bad.
Right.
They're a very aggressive species.
Yeah. How, this is kind of might seem like a random question out of all of this species talk, but how wide was your survey kind of distributed among people? Like how diverse of people from different regions did you get responding?
Yeah, so of my 5 surveys, I had over 1,200 responses between 2 semesters, which was awesome. Most of my responses came from the Colorado region, so like Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, because most of CSU's student body is from Colorado.
Right.
I've really tried contacting coastal universities and like other like inland universities, and I was actually able to get some participation from a couple schools in San Diego and Texas A&M Corpus Christi, just to get a little more like coastal perspective.
Right.
I'm still working on trying to convince other universities to help me with this, and I think once I get to grad school it'll be a little easier, because I'll have more like pull, just being like, hey, I'm a grad student, like I'm doing my like PhD research. People will be like, oh, okay, I'll help you. So not as diverse as I wanted it to be, but there's definitely some diversity, and I certainly had enough responses from the like California coast to give a good coastal perspective compared to like inland with Colorado. So yeah, I was pretty happy with the mixture of people.
That's good. So after you're officially completed with this thesis at CSU, do you want to continue with this specific way of researching this topic, or when you go off to grad school and off to your PhD research, or do you want to kind of get away from the survey and research it in a different way?
No, I definitely want to continue with this. I want to expand it a little bit, because what I'd really like to do is go out and not only tag like the species that are in the area, but also take pictures of those individuals, because one of the surveys, the IAT surveys, has pictures of shark and dolphin fins. And so what I'd really like to do is get a bunch of local animals and be like, these are the animals that are living in your environment. These are the animals that are out there. So kind of combine it by doing let me tag to see where they're going, but let me also use you in research about you. So yeah, I definitely want to expand it. Hopefully, like I said, I will have more pull as a grad student to be able to get other universities across the country to participate and let me distribute the survey to their students, because I think the more diversity I have in responses, the more interesting it'll be, and the more I'll be able to, have a concrete solution for how to educate like people from each region. So that way you're educating people specifically in the ways that they should be educated about these animals.
Yeah, kind of tailoring it.
Yeah.
Cool. So closing question here. What's next for Torri in the near future?
Yeah, so even though I officially finished my thesis last semester, like I said, I'm coming up and modifying some of my current surveys to include questions about blackfish, to see how people feel about that movie, what the response is. And I really, I really want to go places with that just to see how it affects people's opinions of killer whales, although I'm sure most people will still consider them a whale and not a dolphin. But yeah, I think that's it for the near future. Just continuing to analyze the data I've collected the past 2 semesters and really see how concrete of evidence and examples I can get.
Well, very cool. Well, thank you so much for stopping in today and letting us ask you all these questions. It was great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me come in and talk about it.
Well, that's it for today, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks for listening. Once again, this is Science CSU.